Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Westernacher webinar, and thank you all for joining in. My name is Bellona, and I'm your host for today. In today's webinar, we would like to present how to implement a dynamic supply chain into your organization. Your experts today are Venkataramani, who is a practice director for planning and analytics. He has a total of 25 plus years of experience with a 20 plus years of experience into SAP. And we have Selin Javaselvi with us, who is a senior subject matter expert. She has a total of around 20 plus years of experience with a 15 plus into planning. What we will be talking about today is a quick introduction about our company, the dynamics of supply chain planning, a comprehensive solution, which is SAP IBP, how to plan better with the solution, Westernacher accelerators, and then we would have a Q&A session. I will now hand it over to my colleague Ramani.
Thank you and good morning, everybody. So let me start with what is Westernacher. So Westernacher is a SAP consulting company which has around 700 plus subject matter experts across different practices. With the revenue of around 700 million plus euros annually. We have been in this industry for close to 50 plus years, and almost 25 plus years we have been the partner with SAP. We are a 100% employee-owned organization. So some of the key points I would like to very briefly highlight about is we are the first EWM partner. We pioneer in the transport management module, and we have done the first yard logistics implementation, and we have also been involved in a lot of projects that is related to S4HANA planning. When I say planning, IBP. And then we are also into some niche skilled technologies like IoT, SAC, and BI. Like I said before, ours is 50 plus years old company. We started way back in 1969, and then we have expanded ourselves to multiple regions of the globe. And right now we are situated in 18 countries globally and located at around 26 cities in the world. In India, we have been here for almost 6 plus years now, and around 120 plus employees are there with us. So what are our industry expertise? Of course, we are not focused on any specific industry domain. We have catered our services to a varieties of industries covering various modules, which covers automotive, industrial components. We have been heavily engaged with LSPs, FMCGs, life sciences, and even with oil and gas related experts in the Middle East area. And this is not something specific to IBP. Just I wanted to make it clear here. We have been providing our services from EWM perspective, transport management perspective, yard logistics, and IBP as well. This is a very simple extract of some of the customers with whom we have been engaged from the SAP IBP perspective. Just for the reference purpose, we have given around 10 customers. Of course, the names are not notified here, but if you look at the topics, you would notice that we have been engaged with the different topics of SAP IBP, covering from your sales and operations, your planning. When I say planning, the demand, the supply, response, everything we have covered. And we also have good expertise when it comes to the integration of IBP with the other applications, wherein the data flows from SAP or some other third-party systems, and how IBP can accept that data and how it will facilitate in planning. So this is just a reference purpose. For any detailed references on the customer part, definitely you can connect with Bellona, and she would be able to provide the information. We have covered a varieties of industry which you would be able to see in the last row of this particular screen, wherein you will see wind energy or a bio energy company, consumer products, dairy products, and then appliances, original equipment manufacturers. We have also done considerable work when it comes to the pharmaceutical and the chemical industry. So what are the dynamics of supply chain planning, or rather what are the common challenges that we see? So one of the major challenges that usually any business have is the end-to-end supply chain visibility, wherein there is not a connect from the planning all the way to the delivery. And this might be due to various other reasons as well, which also contribute to the challenges. So how do we do the segmentation of the products? How do we do the segmentation of the customers? And have we addressed some of the basic issues of the supply chain? Is there a possibility of doing some standardization when it comes to the end-to-end process, or do we have to focus mainly on the planning perspective? Is there any feasibility from the automation perspective? How do we effectively collaborate so that these kind of challenges are addressed? I mean, maybe we are not able to eliminate it totally, but are we able to minimize the challenges so we have a visibility which would give a better perspective from the management team, so that they can visualize the end-to-end things? This will realize or help us to facilitate to devise some new business models and enable us to get into a globalized market, facilitate the sales growth. And obviously a normal or a common challenge that any organization sees is the very dynamic changes that happens from the demand perspective, because organizations do experience last minute demand changes, last minute requirement changes that comes from the customers, and how best we are equipped ourselves so that we would be able to facilitate our internal planning more effectively, or rather reduce the kind of challenges we face all the way from the planning to the execution and to the delivery process. So these are some of the challenges which normally any organization sees. And in subsequent slides, we will also talk about how SAP IBP will facilitate the organization to minimize these challenges, or rather see a visibility and how to take dynamic or strategic decisions from the organization perspective. So this is a different version of the slide we talked about earlier, because here we have also involved the distribution process. Of course, this is a very typical scenario which most of the organizations will have, where we have an end-to-end connect between the vendors and the customers. So from vendors, how do we connect with the manufacturers, and from the manufacturers, how the distribution centers or the local warehouses are to be planned, and how do we then plan to deliver or dispatch the goods to the customers, or the services to the customers, or the end products to the customers. So to have this end-to-end visibility, the very initial or the starting point would be that we have a clarity on the planning, so that the supply chain is executed smoothly, or rather it is executed with less surprises. That is another way of putting it. So based on the data that we have gathered, we could see that 80% of the customers' expectations are for on-time delivery, and that has been improved in the last 5 years. And 54% of the business team have admitted that the supply chain issues definitely have some kind of impact which would affect their revenue or profitability. And another one is usually which happens in any typical scenario when it comes to holidays or weekends. What kind of planning is already in place? Are there any follow-ups, or are there any advanced information that is percolated to the entire supply chain team? There is some kind of gap there which is having an impact on the revenue or the profitability of the organization. So another typical planning scenario which we are seeing ideally during the current situation, we have taken the right now the global pandemic COVID as an example here. Shortages of medical supplies, and then this also leads to a panic creation within the customer because of lockdowns and other things, which is creating a kind of a concern or a slack in the way the materials are getting moved or made available to the customer. And another one is the facility or the ability to make sure that the network is available and the distribution is not impacted. So what does this lead to? We have a lack of insight. We feel that we are not so responsive to the customers, at least at this kind of unexpected situations, which is leading to some kind of confusions and difficulty within the company to perform efficiently. And because of these kind of changes, short-term adjustments or quick turnaround time on making some decisions, how do we plan for the next week or next month or next quarter or whatever it is creating a challenge. So this leads to increase in your cost incurrence. And another point that also would lead to these confusions is the kind of system support, whatever Excel sheet or this thing is other application tools you have, that also may not be facilitating to do the planning effectively. So I mean, this is a very common thing where what is the expectations from the customer when it comes to the entire supply chain management or supply chain visibility or planning. Obviously, we are looking at the sales growth where we have a better insight or clarity from the customer demand perspective and how effectively we take care of the customer services with a short turnaround time. And we also have the visibility of the forecast with a focus on the improvement of the sales forecast. While we are looking at this sales growth, that has to be aligned with the cost reduction as well. So how do we attain the cost reduction? That can be happening with a systematic plan, and we should be able to have a clear demarcation or a focus on customer specific demands, which we call as a segmentation approach. And the other one is we also need to be very flexible when it comes to the dynamic demands of the customer. A typical example what we can take is from the e-com perspective. When the orders are placed at the last time and we tend to deliver it within a 1 day or 2 days or whatever it is, and then orders get cancelled as well. So these kind of requirements should also not impact our cost. So the focus from the customer perspective is how effectively we do the cost reduction and what kind of agile planning methodologies we can use so that these kind of difficult situations are addressed. And when we are trying to look at the sales growth and the cost reduction, obviously a bigger focus or intensity is given from the capex perspective, wherein we also need to maintain a nominal stock. The stock cannot be kind of, we are depleted of stock or we are overstocking, which means our investment or the cost involved is increasing. So inventory optimization is something very important that SAP IBP provides. And we also need to have a single plan with the visibility across the organization. So the management team which makes the decision on the targets, the planning team which makes the decisions on how the subsequent flows has to happen, and those plans can be done with multiple simulation options, and then that would be percolated to the production or the execution team, and subsequently depending on the organization setup, whether it has to be transferred to the warehouse management or whether we also have to plan something from the transportation perspective, everything is the expectation of the customer. So with this expectations expectations from any customer or a business perspective, SAP IBP is built around, and there are various options on how we facilitate these kind of features from the customer perspective. So how SAP IBP or integrated business planning can provide a comprehensive solution. Now, when we talk about SAP IBP, for clarity, if you look at the pictorial representation, we have a higher level of planning which is covered under sales and operations. And then from sales and operations, we also percolate to the next level of how do we manage the demand and supply. When we talk about the demand and supply, which is running from monthly to weekly planning, there would be multiple characteristics or features that would be deciding on the demand and the supply plan. So we have something called as sensing the demands with different characteristics, and how do we do the fulfillment of the supply. So we have some signals that is generated from the demand, which would facilitate to give this information. So we can also extend beyond by using IoT technologies and sensors to make this more effective. Of course, we have seen the key expectations or achievement in our previous slide, which is the sales growth, the cost reduction, and how do we manage our working capital. So in which direction then the futuristic supply planning is taking us to? So it would help us, or rather SAP solutions would give us a facility or a vision to enable new end-to-end business processes. You can also try multiple combinations there and see which one would be the best to suit you. And those kind of business processes would facilitate to have a very synchronized planning process, which would enable you to have an end-to-end visibility. When I say end-to-end visibility, this starts all the way from the strategic level till the operational level, and even beyond that, where in different silos you would be able to analyze the data and make decisions which can roll up from either top to bottom or bottom up approach. The planning cycle time is very fast. When I say very fast, you will have the options of multiple mathematical combinations which could be simulated, which could be analyzed, and then based on the best decision that is taken by the organization, that particular simulation can be put into the practice, so that that is becoming that is shared across the organization, and the entire process chain would happen as per the finalized plan. So from the planning perspective, SAP IBP, how it is connected with various topics. So we talked about S&OP, we talked about demand planning, we touched upon the supply planning, but it is not limited only to that. If you look at this particular pictorial representation, the supply planning is linked to the portfolio planning. It is also linked to the financial planning and what kind of demands are getting generated. So these kind of data, either it is historical data or live data, that will go as an input. And with those inputs, everything is tied up. You can configure your inventory planning, you can manage your supply planning, you can also do the planning of your materials, what has to be there. And when you arrive at this kind of planning, including the stock levels that you have to maintain, then you will have a visibility on the availability check. You will also have a control when it comes to the execution part, that is from the shop floor perspective. This is further extendable after the completion of the execution or the production. How do we effectively manage when it comes to the storage perspective? Whether you have to whether you will be able to manage with the existing warehouses or the storage locations you have. Do you have to plan for some additional kind of rented storages or whatever it is? And from the storage location, you may also have to do the transportation to the customer location. So do you need to plan something from the transportation perspective? What kind of vehicles has to be in place? Or depending on your past historical data, do you have to arrange for some extra vehicles? And how do we track those vehicles? I mean, tracking of vehicles and subsequent things would be a deep dive into the transport management module. But the information that we are gathering or managing from the planning perspective will help us to have an end-to-end visibility all the way till the customer is serviced. And how do we have a holistic picture of this? Because obviously it would not be possible to look into these topics in silos. So we have something called as control tower, or where you can have a lot of dashboards. When I say dashboards, these dashboards are configured with the KPIs that is specific to a specific business or an organization. It would be a real-time data based on which you will have the facility of seeing it in a pictorial representation. When I say pictorial representation, you can have varieties of charts there. And sometimes if you want to drill down a bit deeper as well, that is also possible, wherein SAP IBP has provided an Excel based UI, which most of the planners are comfortable with. So the feel of you are working on another system totally different from your current UI also is minimized, because it will be a totally Excel based scenario, wherein the planners would be able to key in the data, they can do the different simulations, and those data would be rolled up, and then we would be able to see varieties of dashboards depending on the requirement of the organization to make the decisions. So this is one level down, or a bit deep dive comparing to the previous slide. So we talked about sales and operations, demand planning, inventory planning, response and supply. You would see a lot of blue boxes there, which are all the components or the sub modules that would facilitate to help you in doing those particular activities. So maybe let me take just one example and quickly run through that. For example, if you look at the demand planning, obviously you need to have some information from the demand forecasting, what kind of phase in and phase out planning we will have to do. Are there any promotional activities that we have to consider when we are considering the demand? And what are all the characteristics we have to consider, or or what to say is the sensory items that we have to consider when we are doing the demand planning. So like this, we have multiple characteristics or activities that falls under each of this particular topic, which would help us to do the different levels of planning to come up with the holistic decision. So this is a quick overview of what I was talking before. I'm just trying to summarize it. So just to have a concise picture. So what are the IBP offerings? We have a control tower, which is nothing but a kind of dashboard things which will give a summarized view of the entire planning with the different pictorial representations. You can also drill down to look into the details of the numbers in Excel format. That is one. We have sales and operations, which would be varying somewhere from 1 year to 3 years or 5 years, depending on your organizational requirement, which is a very high level plan. And then we have demand planning, which would provide inputs based on the demands you are expecting or based on your historical data. How do we manage the response and the supply to the customer based on the demands that we are foreseeing, and how best we can do the inventory management or inventory optimization based on the data we have collected from demand and supply. So these are the high level offerings, but the deep dive of this would be covering the entire business process scenarios. So what are the features available? Yes, we have the cloud deployment option, and whatever data we are looking at is a real-time info. It is not that this particular data is 1 week old or 2 days old or 3 days old. You can immediately simulate the scenario and you can see what kind of subsequent information you want to see, which is a real-time information, and there is a social collaboration with the different networks, and these kind of details would help to do predictive analysis. So instead of doing the reactive actions, we are able to simulate the scenario with multiple iterations, and it would be helpful to make decisions based on the different iterations, and we can make a predicament here. So with these kind of features, what outcome we would be able to see? We would have an end-to-end visibility of the entire supply chain process, because we are doing multiple iterations and combinations to determine the different scenarios. The processes are harmonized, and obviously when we are trying to make these kind of simulations, it also helps us to enable quick decision making as to which particular planning schedule we will have to follow. And then when we have these kind of details, we are also able to align the planning details with the execution details, and there is a very effective change management. I would say this is a dynamic change management depending on the dynamic changes to the planning, which is aligned with the changes that is requested by the customer. So we talked about the high level components of SAP IBP. So what value add Westernacher would be able to provide on top of the standard SAP IBP? So we use the concept of points of view, where the UI screen is configured in such a way that you will be able to have a very user-friendly UI and get into the details of it by clicking on each of those particular boxes. We also have a three-dimensional definition for the planning hierarchies. And when it comes to the planning, it is very important that we have a segmented approach. When I say segmented approach, here I would give customer and the product as an example, because there might be customers under different categories, highly demanding, large volume business, and some customers are very rare, but still their volume is too high, and the products are changing dynamically, but we have to address the customer's requirements depending on the interactions and the business they bring into us. So we have a segmented approach which is focused more from the product and the customer perspective. So when we are doing these kind of approaches, definitely a organizational change management initiative would be required. So what I mean by organizational change management is, obviously there will be different bucket of people who will be responsible for different kind of activities. So what we do is we have an organized plan on how to deal with this. So we have this is a very generic plan, but of course this would be changing depending on the customer's requirements. So we focus on the target audience and what is the kind of objective that has to be covered when it comes to the individual group of people or the individual departments or whatever it is. What kind of efforts are required to address the different topics identified, and we conduct organized sessions, demos, and workshops to make sure that the different groups are aligned with the organizational management. So this involves process coaching. This also involves training. Training, again, we have categorized into two topics. One is the key user training and the end user training. Key user training, what we mean by here in other term is train the trainer. That is, you will have some subject matter experts in the different sections for whom the topic of training or the focus of training would be different. And then we also have an organized training for the end users who would be working on specific topics or specific areas of the applications which they will be doing on a operational basis. And how do we do this? So for this to be done, definitely there has to be some kind of guide or some kind of documentation to be made available. So those kind of handbooks or training material or end user manual, whatever we call, so those documents also will be prepared, which is very user friendly, which would be used as an input for the training. And on top of this, of course, these are something very generic, which you would be seeing on the last box. We would be able to achieve all these things with a definitive business case definition. Of course, segmentation we talked about, and we would also be ensuring that the team is comfortable and the system is stabilized, and the support would be provided until the system stabilization happens. So with this, a little bit of elaboration on the topics I told, Celine would be walking through this, who is our senior subject matter expert. Celine, I will be sharing giving the access to you.
Thanks, Ramani. So till now, what we saw was a broad level planning and how SAP IBP can help in doing this planning in a very broad level. Let's slightly go into a detailed level of this. Anyway, we'll not be discussing into so much technicalities of SAP IBP, for which we'll have some subsequent technical sessions arranged and you will be invited for it. Kindly make sure that you join those sessions to get more knowledge or details about SAP IBP. In this slide, we talk about where planning is needed. A complete planning is necessary for any organization. Organizations cannot sustain without any planning. So there is a strategic planning at a high level. This might run for probably 5 years planning or 3 years planning. And this strategic planning, which is at the organizational level, has to be broken down so that for each department, like for example, the finance department or the production department or the sales department or the product lifecycle management. So for each department, this main strategic plan has to be broken down so that all the departments, they work together in the same direction to achieve the strategic plan which has been decided by the company's management. This planning which has to be done should also be broken down into different periodic buckets. The high level planning should be broken down, like for example, quarterly buckets, monthly buckets, or probably if needed into daily buckets. As you can see it in this slide, the strategic planning is divided into, here we have an example of 3 different departments. That's the PLM, product lifecycle management, and sales and the finance. So the main strategic plan is divided into the business planning, the rolling financial forecasting, the finance forecast. So these might be at the quarterly level, and then this is divided into monthly buckets where the monthly targets are set for the sales people to achieve, the inventory department to maintain their safety stock level. Then that's broken down again so that you have the daily targets set. So that, and all this together helps in achieving the main target which is set for the company. Here we see that the supply chain planning is the process of planning a product from raw material to the customer. It includes supply planning, production planning, demand planning, sales and operations planning, etc. The supply chain planning determines how best to realize the target or the forecast. The objectives is to balance the supply and demand in a manner that achieves the financial and the service objectives of the enterprise. The production planning addresses the production and manufacturing modules within the company. It considers the resource allocation of the employees, the work processes, the production capacity, everything. Demand planning is the process of forecasting the demand to make sure the products are reliably delivered. Effective demand planning can improve the accuracy of the revenue forecast, align the inventory levels to enhance the profitability of the business for a particular channel or a product or a division, etc. The S&OP process is a monthly integrated business management process that empowers the management to focus on the key supply chain drivers. This should be including the sales, the marketing, the demand management, the production, the inventory management, and the new product introduction. In this slide, we talk about the architecture of IBP. So as you can see, the central part, that's where the IBP model resides, the IBP model and the IBP engine resides. It simply means that the data is stored and calculated in the in-memory database of SAP, that is the SAP HANA database. The database consists of the data which is stored in the real time, including the dimensions, the attributes, the key figures, the calculations, the planning, the scenario, the simulations, etc., etc., everything. Because this is stored in SAP HANA database, which is a cloud-based solution, and it is a cloud-based solution, hence you have a state-of-art security also. The cloud solution is faster and easier to implement. It reduces the capital expenditure by providing the up-to-date functionality. There is no need for any upgrades, by the maintenance of the hardware, etc., by saving the cost. The integrated planning acquires data from many source systems. As you can see it in the diagram on the left hand side, there can be any types of source system, like any SAP system, like the ECC system, the SRM system, the CRM system, could be any BW system, or it could be any third-party systems like a homegrown system, or some informal file like an Excel file or a CSV file where the data is stored. So from all these source systems, the data is captured and it's brought to the IBP system. For this, we use a tool which is called as the CPIDS. This is an inbuilt tool with SAP IBP, which helps in the extraction, transformation, and loading of the data from the source system to the central SAP IBP system. Anyway, we can use any other ETL tool also. By ETL, I mean the extraction, transformation, and the loading tool. There's no hard and fast rule that only CPIDS should be used. Only thing is, the data which is imported into IBP is processed as needed and should be able to be processed as needed, and it should be loaded to the IBP. The data which is being imported is imported through secure means, for example, SFTP or HTTPS protocols, or we have a web UI to import data from the informal systems like Microsoft Excel or CSV files. The data which is imported into IBP is processed, the heuristic is run there, the forecasting is run there, and these data are available in the browser or mobile application or files like the Excel files, which is very easy for people to use. People are already familiar with using these tools because the output which can be viewed in all these formats, it becomes easy for an in-house person to access the reports, and for the people on the field, like for example, the sales executives also can access this data on their mobiles or the web UI. Apart from this, down you can see there is something called as SAP JAM. SAP JAM is not a part of the SAP standard license. It has to be procured separately, but anyway, it helps in the S&OP process. This is a collaboration tool. In supply chain, the collaboration is a main point for a stable process to help any company rise to its full potential. Indeed, the companies that collaborate effectively across the supply chain have experienced substantial reductions in their inventory costs, and they improve in speed, the service level increases, the customer satisfaction is better, etc., etc. So the perfect example in the S&OP process that requires much information coming from the different systems such as finance or sales or supply or production, etc. So the SAP JAM, like any other social networking tool, works on the concept of groups, and each group in SAP JAM is linked with a specific step on the supply chain process. Here we talk about the SAP IBP components. There are different components as you see it on the screen. First, on top, we see the supply chain control tower. In the previous slides, we did talk about it a little bit. This enables the supply chain professionals to navigate across, to analyze, and profitably manage the supply chain in real time. It creates an end-to-end visibility of the supply chain along with a real-time integration with the SAP data source. It also has the option to drill down to the detailed the document level, the order level information. The best part of that is that it can be configured for analytics, what if analysis, like all those things, the alerts, and case management also. Sales and operations planning, yes, we will be discussing about it in detail in the coming slides. So I'd like to keep it for the next slides. The demand planning, yes, it is an end-to-end demand planning engine which comes with SAP IBP. It combines the traditional mid to long-term planning based on the statistical methods, with the possibility to run more accurate demand sensing models to improve the forecast accuracy for the short-term planning horizons. Inventory, IBP inventory is a decision-taking tool. It optimizes the safety stock levels across the entire distribution network based on the customer demand, the replenishment parameters like the forecast error, the lead times, the variability, the replenishment frequency, the lot size, the target service level, etc. Response and supply, SAP response and supply allows a quick adaptation to the changes in their demand. You know, the market today is very volatile. So considering the changes in the market, SAP S&OP helps in considering the full supply chain model. It helps simulating the plans for production, for distribution, and for procurement. It helps to meet the customer needs. Both finite and infinite capacity modes are available, like the advanced planning system. The what-if analysis helps the supply and process module to provide visibility to the various potential scenarios. We have already discussed about the SAP HANA database on which this whole platform of SAP IBP sits. Hence, I would like to just give a short. It's a real-time, in-memory real-time database of SAP owned by SAP, and SAP IBP, the cloud-based solution which uses this SAP HANA database. Next, we discuss in detail about the SAP S&OP process. So S&OP process is a process that is led by the senior management of the company. They evaluate, they revise the time phase projections of the demand, the supply, the product, the portfolio changes, the strategic projects, the financial plans over the mid to the long-term planning horizons. S&OP is a monthly management process that ensures that the company is focused and aligned, and they put in all their efforts to collectively achieve the priorities which are set by the organizational management. S&OP deals with the continuous change that occurs in the business, and it is a process that effectively manages the ongoing change. In practice, you can call this as a replanning process. Correctly implemented, SAP S&OP is a demand and strategy-driven cross-functional process which includes all the functions of the company. This process planning gives a clear picture to the management about the key company resources in support of anticipated customer demands and expectations, new product development, and the company initiatives. In the process explained in the slide, which we can see, the S&OP process is explained to a detailed level, but let's look at it on the main sub-process levels. The first step, as we can see on the left-hand side, is the gathering of the data. The required master data, like for example, the products, the locations, the customers, all these things would be gathered. And the transactional data, like for example, the actual sales quantity, the open sales orders, the inventory stocks, etc. All these things, combining with the master data and the inventory the transactional data would be loaded to the IBP system to generate the statistical forecasting. The second step would be the demand processing. So based on the forecast, which is the statistical forecast that is generated, a demand planning is done by the sales and the finance team. The demand planning, as you can see it on the slide, can be divided into two levels. That is the local demand and the consensus demand. The local demand is region level, and the consensus demand is the global level. The third step in the process would be the supply planning. It comprises of the production planning, the resource planning, and setting the inventory targets of the raw materials and the finished goods. After the third step, supply planning is done, then we have the S&OP, pre-S&OP meetings, where there is a comparison done between the forecast and the supply planning which is done. A comparison is done, and some decisions, which is like recommendations, which is needed for the S&OP, is given to the final S&OP team, the management team, which will decide about going ahead with the recommendations or to change any, if any changes are needed in it. In the subsequent slides, we will go into detail about the supply planning and the demand planning. This slide talks about the demand planning. What is S&OP? Demand planning. At a high level, if you see, these are just the set targets. Like you can see on the first thing, there is a set target at the company level. The market today is very volatile. Okay, there is a high variation in demand. The expectation is that the product life cycle is short. The reduction in the delivery time is the requirement. So that is very high. So we have to meet all these things to remain in the competition. Taking into consideration the work, and for doing all those things, we have to take into consideration the daily work challenges, the poor forecasting accuracy, the inefficient operations, or the low service levels. All those things have to be taken into consideration to give the desired results. IBP demand process gives a new opportunity to adapt to the new normal context. The demand planning diagram in this slide is a size just for a sample purpose. The actual planning process might change from this diagram, and you can see that from organization to organization, the planning process would be different. So you can use this diagram only for illustration purpose. Here first, you can see that in the first line, if the company's board, it sets the targets. Setting the target, it's the plant budget. We can take an example, like for example, for different product groups, a target is being set. Like we can take it like soaps. Let's take three product groups like soaps and toothbrushes and toothpastes, for example. So for each group, they set a target. While setting the target, they take into consideration the exchange rates also, and they set this target. Once this target is set, the second process is the customer sales support team, which takes into consideration the historical sales, probably last 2 years or 3 years sales. They take into consideration, and they run a monthly S&OP cycle and create a statistical forecast. Like for example, if we have 3 customers and 3 products, then the statistical forecast will give a combination of 9 records for each customer, and for each product it will set a standard statistical value. It will give it. But the key account manager knows that with being in regular contact with the customer, the manager can predict that this particular customer, for some of, if he has 100 customers, he might be able to do a prediction for probably 10 or 15 customers, saying that the customer, from such and such customer, we expect this much quantum of forecast. So he gives that special information to be incorporated into the forecast. Combining these two, the statistical forecast and the key account manager's information and the target which is being set by the company, there is a review meeting which takes place, where they accept the key account manager's forecast, or they just decide to go with the statistical forecast, and they can set a review forecast. The review meeting, they give the review forecast. This is again reviewed in a meeting, probably on every Thursdays. That's what happens. The first Thursday of the month, or the second Thursday, depending upon the starting day of the month. From this meeting, the outcome is an approved forecast. This approved forecast is reviewed again if needed, or it becomes the final approved forecast, which is sent to the different departments like the sales, the production, the procurement, etc. for processing. They set targets for each department to work to achieve the target. This final forecast is nothing but the demand consensus plan. Next slide, we talk about the supply planning. The supply planning allows a quick adaptation to the changes in the demand. Considering the full supply chain model, it helps simulating plans for production, for distribution, for procurement, to meet the customer needs. The what if analysis, which is provided here, gives a visibility into the various potential scenarios. The data repository is organized according to the supply dimensions, product location, resource, sourcing, the different sources, etc. And the key figures reflect both quantities and the currency values. The added value of SAP IBP is to utilize the optimization algorithm with capacity and material constraints to develop a tactical supply plan, but also to the ability to run the multiple simulations and comparisons. A part of an extension of the sales and the supply operations. Similar to the previous slide, the diagram which is given in this slide is also just for the illustration purpose, and the actual process in your organization might differ from this. Let's take this as just for illustrations and try to understand what the supply planning is. Here we can see in the left hand side in the black boxes, those are the inputs needed for doing the supply planning. The first is the inventory budget, which comes from the finance team. The inventory targets for the finished goods and the raw materials, this comes from the inventory manager. The factory calendar, which comes from the plants, different plants. So all these things serve as an input for the supply planning. The inventory budget, which is set by the finance team, is values. It's like it is in currencies. It's the inventory targets, that's nothing but the safety stock level, which is given, that is will be in quantities. So from the plant manager, from the factory, using the factory calendar, they review the demand consensus, which is the output of the demand planning. They use that to create a capacity plan. So they analyze and they say that, okay, for the production of 1 unit of a product, they use how many hours of time is needed for production. That's what they review, and they give so that for a particular month, how many products can be produced in the plant. So with this capacity plan, they review and they set the product version. Setting the product version is nothing but the BOM is attached to it, and they review how much raw material is needed, whether to achieve the demand consensus forecast which is given, to achieve that, whether it is possible, whether they have the capacity to produce those many materials. Yes, no, whether procurement is possible. So reviewing all these things, they give out the review capacity loads. So they come out with a conclusion for the supply plan. So the inventory as well as the capacity of the plant together, which is in, if you see that the capacity plan would be in hours and the inventory budget is in quantity. So the hours, from hours, they'll convert it into quality and quantity, and they give out the supply plan to achieve the net demand. This is combined with the inventory budget to check how much is in stock, whether the safety stock level is met, or whether there is any requirement for production, how much requirement is there for production, and how much procurement of the raw materials or semi-finished goods or whatever it is that has to be procured. So that is the procurement process, and all these things together are analyzed. The output of this planning, the views which are generated here are analyzed on a Thursday, probably the Thursday after the demand planning. That's 1 week after it. It could be the second or the third Thursday of the month where this happens, and the final approved plan would be a production plan. This production plan serves as an input to the product and goes to the production team. Next, we talk about the supply optimizer. Supply optimizer is nothing but it transforms the business scenarios into mathematical model representation. We call that as a MILP, that is mixed integer linear programming. Leaving those technical jargon aside, what we need to understand is that the supply optimizer takes into consideration the master data, some constraints which are there, as like it could be the transportation cost, etc. We'll go into detail about it. And the penalty if we breach the constraints. We take all these things into consideration, we merge it with the parameters and the input which comes from the planners to give the best possible solution. Now the master data, we know what is the master data. The master data is the products or the material, the location, the capacity available, etc. All those things. The constraints which are there are some constraints which cannot be violated. For example, like the minimum or the maximum lot sizing, the sourcing validity, the production resource capacity. So these are some of the constraints which cannot be violated at all. So it is like a hardcore thing which has to be considered for doing the optimization. And there are some constraints, like for example, the minimum transport, the minimum production, the storage resource capacity, etc., which are like it can be breached sometimes if needed. So these things which are breached, the constraints which are breached, that gives rise to the financial impact for violating these constraints. So that is like the late delivery cost rate, the inventory target violation cost, the capacity supply expansion cost rate, etc. So taking into consideration all these, the supply optimizer also takes, the supply optimizer also takes into consideration the planner's input to work out a mathematical formula which gives a comfortable and a best possible solution. Next, we go to the sample dashboard of SAP IBP. Here in this sample dashboard, you can see that we have there's a mapping of actual sales quantity and the consensus demand. It's a historical thing, like the actual sales which has happened, that has been mapped against the supply, the consensus demand. So we can check whether the consensus demand is up to the mark, how it was, like whether it was achievable, not achievable, and this is mapped against the different periodic buckets, those are the monthly buckets. This example, it gives again the consensus demand plan, but it's against the budget. So when compared with the budget, how we have performed, how the consensus demand has worked, that can be checked here, and this is mapped against each product. With this, I'd like to pass it on the control to Ramani.
Thank you, Celine. We did a bit of deep dive into the S&OP, demand supply planning, and the optimizer part. We will get into the Westernacher accelerators. So what do we mean by accelerators? So we have based on our expertise and experience, we have come up with packaged solutions. Again, these packaged solutions are arrived at based on our interactions with various customers, the various implementations we have done, and the inputs has been sourced from our entire global team. So we have categorized that into 5 models. One is the fast one, the next is the basic, then the intermediate, followed by advanced and extensive. So you can also log into our website that is given below. Bellona would be able to provide that information to you. But this is the model we have as a kind of a package from the IBP implementation perspective. So a little bit of deep diving into that. In this slide, you will see fast is categorized into two topics, because sometimes it may not be necessary that you have to go for all the 5 topics with some bits and pieces here and there. And by using the sales and operations planning itself, covering some of the basic guidelines, which is good to start with, because sometimes big bang approach may also be challenging for some business organizations. So we also have the option of going in a phased manner. So here you would see we have 2 fast. The very first one is S&OP, where you can look at the very high level planning, which would give a good representation of how the subsequent flows will happen, and critical management decisions can be taken. Obviously, you will have a lot of dashboards, and when we say S&OP, it is not S&OP alone. There would be some very basic things that we will have to do the configuration from the demand and supply perspective also, so that the necessary KPI dashboards are available. Similarly, another fast one is, instead of going directly to S&OP, you can also focus on the demand part, wherein some inputs would flow in from the sales and operations perspective, but still it will give a better clarity from the demand perspective. So like this, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different columns here. Of course, fast is split into 2, depending on sales and operations focus heavily or demand focus heavily. So the approximate timelines that are given here is again based on our basic solutions or requirements that has to be covered. So that is what we have mentioned here. So when we talk about extensive, we are looking at an end-to-end IBP implementation, where all the features or all the functionalities required from any business perspective, let it be from sales and operations, demand, inventory, supply, or whatever it is. So everything will be in place, and you will also have a holistic picture when you are looking at the dashboards, and that would be a full-fledged implementation. So different packages are available, and we would be happy to discuss further on this and see which would be the best fitment, and whether we need to go with an agile approach or a conventional approach where we do everything in a big bang approach. So Bellona, with that, we have come to the end of the presentation. So if there are any questions, me and Celine would be happy to answer that.
Yes, thank you, Ramani. Thank you, Celine. It was a really informative and helpful presentation. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining into our webinar. So we would open the Q&A session. You can either type in the question into the Q&A window. I think we already have questions coming in. So we'll take the first question. Would the IBP implementation phase follow a traditional PM approach? Ramani, would you like to answer this?
It is not mandatory. The reason for saying that is, see, sometimes it becomes very important that you also see the results in short pockets of time. So we also have the approach of agile, wherein we do have short-term deliverables with different sprints running there. That is something we would be able to finalize and agree, discussing with the customer and what is the expectations from them. But our approach model is flexible, and we would be able to accommodate both the scenarios, whether it is a conventional approach or agile methodology, wherein short-term results are seen and the progress are also visible and utilized by the end users. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ramani. We have the second question regarding time to value packaged solutions. What is the duration? Is this something firm or flexible? Ramani, this would be for you again.
Yes, yes, Bellona. See, this is not something firm, let me put it that way, because the durations we have arrived is based on our experience with the past implementations and the interactions with the customer. So we have analyzed a lot of data, and we have proved some of the functionalities which we think would be very critical to start with. But sometimes there is always some kind of plus and minus, or some additions or deletions from the scope perspective. So depending on that, there might be some minor variations here and there, but definitely I do not expect it to be too different. Maybe few weeks here and there. That again depends on under which category the requirement falls in, and it is flexible. It is flexible to answer your question.
Okay, Ramani, can you just move to the next slide, because your email addresses are mentioned there, and if at all they have any personal questions for you, they can always get back to you. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Ramani. Okay, there is this next question. Can IBP alone be implemented to address planning challenges? I guess this would be for Selin.
IBP alone, yes, it can be implemented, but IBP requires the source data. Like, then there should be a source from which we can fetch those data. Like, for example, the sales data, the master data. We need all these data to do the analysis, the planning. So there has to be a source from which we can get this data. It could be an SAP source, or it could be from an Excel flat file or any third-party self-grown system. That's not a problem. But yes, we need source data. Hence, there should be this data should be stored somewhere from which we can get the data and we can do the IBP planning.
Okay, thank you, Selin. Venkata, there is this question directed to you. It would be great if you can throw some light on the success stories.
I would have to go back to the earlier slide where we have mentioned about the implementations. But if there is some specific, success stories or case studies that has to be shared, I would be happy to share it through an email, Bellona.
Okay, sure, Ramani.
Yeah.
We have another question here. Is there any sequence suggested for implementation? Would it be S&OP and then supply and then demand?
Let me take this question, Celine.
Yeah.
It is not recommended. If you have looked into the time to value package, if you recollect that particular screen, depending on the requirement, which one has to be given the highest priority, we would be able to accommodate that. Of course, there might be some kind of data, collaboration that has to happen. But it is doable, whether we have to focus on demand, whether we have to focus heavily on supply and operations, sales and operations, or supply planning. So that flexibility is available in the IBP.
Okay, thank you, Ramani.
One more point I would like to add there. The session that we had today is also at a high level. We are aware of that, but the subsequent sessions will be technical deep dive sessions with specific focus on different topics. So it would be maybe, right now it is 35,000 feet, but technical deep dive, we are looking at somewhere between 5,000 to 10,000 feet. So it would be a lot of technical stuffs that is planned in the subsequent sessions.
Okay, so we have few more questions that have come in. I think we'll just take them because we have another 10 minutes for the webinar. What is the integration with SAP EWM? Can you please give us some use case?
So the integration from any system for that matter, might it be an SAP EWM system or any other system to IBP is through SAP IDS. So from any source system to SAP IBP is through CP IDS. Now CP IDS is an inbuilt solution which is provided by SAP IBP. If needed, if for any reason we don't want to use CP IDS, then we can go for any ETL tool. That flexibility is also available. CPIDS comes as a free with the IBP bundle. Hence, we generally use CPIDS. Using CPIDS, we can connect to any source system. So, might it be EWM system or SAP BW system, no difference in it. What we need is the required data, the sales data, or the demand, whatever it is, for the processing of the IBP solution. Whatever required data is there, if that data is available in the source system, we can use CPIDS. Yes.
Thank you all for joining in. We would love to invite you back to our next online event. Thank you, everyone.